Now, look, I don't hate this show. I don't dislike it, I just don't feel anything when watching it. It's visually impressive, the scope of the world, the action, the voice acting, it's truly something to behold. In terms of the story and the characters, I struggled to connect with them, and I'm going to be using that word a lot in this video. I can't really say if I like this more than the first season, a season I enjoyed, but when it ended, I wasn't exactly eager to see the next chapter of this epic series. In fact, I completely forgot everything that happened if it wasn't for the recap. But what I did like more in this season was that people were getting shit done, and not sitting around on council tables talking in the most mundane way about the political state of Piltover and Zaun. Here the season starts with a bang, literally. Caitlyn's mother dies, which ignites a vendetta that would change Caitlyn and make her an interesting character, because I have not been a fan of her. I mean, she's a romantic interest for Vi and she's in a powerful position, but there's not really much else to her. But now her mother died, we can see a side to her that at the very least will make her more engaging than what we've seen in the last season. So the remaining members of the council have to find a way to deal with the rising revolution in Zaun ignited by Jinx. This causes Vi to reluctantly side with Caitlyn and Piltover against Zaun, and that was the only part I was intrigued by. Seeing the internal conflict of Vi having to fight against the people of her own city, but for a greater cause. The rest of this episode I wasn't really into. It was so slow and dragged on, cutting back and forth to storylines I didn't care about. This Heimerdinger, they just kind of sidelined him, as well as the kid that looks like the villain in Black Panther, Echo, who eventually has a whole episode dedicated to him, and it was pretty entertaining, albeit confusing. But ultimately, the only characters I care about are Vi, Jinx, and Victor. Everyone else I can give or take, and the second episode is no different really. It gets better towards the end, much more action and excitement, and the third episode once again followed a similar pattern of being a slow burn and become exciting towards the end. I felt like they wanted me to skip the first half of these episodes and just watch the end. The politics and conflict just wasn't engaging to me. The dialogue feels very stiff, and when they're being delivered by characters I don't care about, the whole scene just comes off as a blur. At least characters like Vi and Jinx, and honestly everyone from Zaun talk in a way where you believe this world exists. It exudes great depth and personality in the way they appear and speak. Someone like Jace just feels more reserved, which makes him less compelling to someone like Vi. So yeah, the first 3 episodes were giving me the same impression I had on the first season. Just okay, exploring fascinating ideas, but most of the time kind of a drag. In episode 5 and 6, I've got to say the storytelling really improved here. I became more invested because of the connection between Vi and Jinx, and also a lost and forgotten soul who was presumed long dead, but he is in fact alive. Kind of. That character being Vander, who was actually my favourite character in Season 1, even though he was only present for 3 episodes. For me, he was the emotional core that held Vi and Jinx together. He brought a feeling of warmth that made this world come alive, which I wasn't really getting from other characters. He spoke like someone who wasn't given the most stilted dialogue, which is how everyone in Piltover speaks. Vander's life is what caused Vi and Jinx to temporarily unite under the same cause. I was finally invested in the journey of these characters. The scene in which Vi and Jinx start arguing was great. It was all relevant to the past and the state they were both in emotionally. You could tell there was a lot of blood boiling on both sides. It also gave me hope that this show wasn't just digressing into complete depression among every single character. It also gave a lot more weight to Silco's character. He was definitely one of the most engaging characters in Season 1, even though there were times he felt quite derivative as a villain. They show a flashback of Silco and Vander when they're younger, which made me appreciate Silco way more. And when Vi and Jinx discovered the letter from Vander apologizing to Silco. This made you look at the whole show differently. You think how different it could have been, but that's what makes this show so fascinating. How it provides you with glimpses of hope and then takes it away from you. It shows that working towards peace, to some kind of victory, is something you have to work incredibly hard for, and you're going to suffer many setbacks and tragedies before reaching that moment in your life. However, even though this tale of tragedy resumed plentifully in Season 2, characters were finally doing shit that was causing them to take great risks. And that makes things very entertaining for the story. Even though I wasn't invested in many of the characters, you got the feeling that something big, something explosive was going to happen. For me, Mel was always a dull character. The way she spoke, it may have been elegant and graceful, but her lines were causing me to fall asleep. Her mother, on the other hand, Ambessa, the warlord, is a far more engaging character. She is full of energy and spirit. You know that she is someone to be feared. She helped push the conflict between the leaders of Piltover and the rebels of Zaun. I would have liked someone like Dr. Revik to be a more prominent character in this show, more so than the likes of Mel and Caitlin. His story, tragic as it may be, is fascinating as it is gut-wrenching. You feel for him. He has a backstory with depth, and we can see this in his current state. This traumatized romantic turned into a psychotic Frankenstein-like surgeon. He is a great character to this show and adds so much nuance in terms of emotion and mythology, yet he was underused. Even the conflict between Victor and Jace starts to get very interesting. Victor, who is also one of my favourite characters from Season 1, essentially becomes a godlike figure. He even becomes a cult leader. To think where he came from, this impeccable rise to this divine figure is really quite astounding. Although I do fear that he may become too powerful and end up like Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen, who was completely devoid of emotion. We finally see Jace in a different way. He was kind of a boring character in the first season. He was interesting with his ambitions and goals, but his relationship with Mel and his friendship with Caitlin really brought the roof down. This time he's rugged, he's been through shit, and he's a murderer. And it came out of nowhere because we didn't really know where he'd been in the void. It was definitely one of the highlights of the season and a damn good cliffhanger. The lore of the Hextech or the void, I don't really know what it is. But whatever Victor has transcended into, it's very perplexing. I really think they should have done a better job of conveying its purpose, because I was just getting confused at this point. Overall, it was just great to see all the characters merge and collide. I mean, everything went down in Victor's cult village. Caitlin deceived Ambessa, which I didn't care about that much, but it did push the story along. And you know that Ambessa is not going to take that very well. That orphan kid who Jinx kind of raises sacrifices herself. I didn't know how I felt about that. Just because it's a cute kid doesn't mean I'm supposed to be in tears when she dies. She was only in this show for about 6 episodes and not even that present in any of them. We didn't know anything about her. That was a big problem about Arcane. Apart from Vi, Jinx and Vander, and Victor, there was no one else I would really emotionally connect with. It was very cold and hostile. Even with a character as good as Victor though, I needed more in terms of his background and his relationship with someone like Dr. Revik. The last 3 episodes were entertaining, visually so to speak, but story-wise, I was completely lost and confused. Episode 5 and 6 were probably the highlight of the season. Those were the 2 that I connected with best. These concluding episodes, however, made sure that I was never going to understand anything that was going on. It honestly felt rushed in a way. Episode 7 is dedicated entirely to the multiverse storyline. Parallel dimensions are explored. It was quite cool, but at the same time, we are focusing on a character like Echo who has been sidelined the entire season. This part of the story was really fascinating, but it just kind of felt shoehorned in there, in a way that doesn't feel necessary to the main story arc of Arcane. I mean, this kind of story we've seen in many sci-fi movies and TV shows. Characters warning other characters in the present about the future, learning from mistakes in other universes and making amends in your own. What could have been and what couldn't. It was an episode that didn't need to happen. You might argue that Jace had to go through all of that hell because it was the only way he could change Victor back to himself. But it was still confusing as hell, because I didn't know what he was searching for. I was so lost at this point. He was just grunting and hustling his way out of this cave, and it was because he was kind of sidelined that I forgot about his arc. Also, his arc isn't that interesting, and it shows that Arcane is trying to juggle too many storylines, and only one of them is emotionally engaging. The rest are entertaining at best, but offer nothing more. Arcane is a show that's full of lore and political depth, but the way they convey these 2 themes don't compel me enough to care for the characters. When the people of Zaun rebel and the modern punk rock music starts playing, I don't care about the people of Zaun. It's all just style over substance for me. These last 3 episodes were just visual galore. So many colours, great fusion of 2D and 3D animation. But the story was just losing me. During the battle in episode 9, there's a lot going on. So much so that characters begin to die. Now you would think that would be the main characters, but that can't be because they're in the game, so they can't die. No, of course I'm talking about random characters who are established for about a brief minute in one of the earlier episodes, in which they expect us to emphasize and relate to, which makes their death all the more heartbreaking. Except that wasn't the case. I didn't really feel for these characters. There's this one character who dies and I don't even remember her. But Vi is holding her hand before she dies and I just thought, who is this person? And then some other guard dies and I'm still not that bothered. Is it because I'm cold-hearted? Maybe. But I'm a guy who is only interested in a story based on how engaging the characters are. I have to connect with them or understand them to be invested in their journeys. But in Arcane, there were just so many characters where I didn't feel this connection. I have to say that I was surprised when listening to an interview with the co-creator of Arcane, Christian Linker, who was adamant that the plan from the very beginning was to tell this specific story in just 2 seasons. At first I thought, isn't the fanbase big enough to say we want more? And also some of these episodes were pacing themselves in a way where you assumed there were so many episodes to come in the future. So it was confusing because the pacing never felt like it was just something that would be concluded in 2 seasons. They kept setting things up in this season. How on earth are you going to conclude all of this when you've been walking every episode at the pace of a sloth? But I gave it some thought, and I have massive respect for the creators. Sometimes shows don't know when to finish and just carry on until they realize no one is tuning in. In this case, for them to think about this show with careful consideration, frame for frame, beat for beat, all of this effort they've put into Arcane, from its stylish animation to its diverse narrative. I have nothing but admiration for the way the creators and everyone who worked on Arcane have handled this rather difficult project, because League of Legends is one of the most popular online games in the world. The fact that they managed to satisfy many of these fans, and you're not really hearing any complaints, well, that's a massive achievement on its own. But I don't mind that I'm the minority who doesn't like this show that much. I don't think it's bad by any means. I enjoyed it somewhat, but it's not something I would ever go back and watch, simply because it wasn't for me. The creators made the show they wanted and it worked. I admire them for that. For me, I think the writing really did nothing to make me care about anyone, bar a few characters. The animation, as incredible as it was, clouded the quality of the story.